Corla, I think this is actually a very significant motion, an incredibly timely one, and I compliment Deputies Connolly and Pringle for giving up the time to have us discuss it, because we're actually at a critical moment in terms of seaweed as a resource with regard to its development as a potentially sustainable, ecologically sound, environmentally friendly industry. If we get it right, there will be huge benefits. If we get it wrong, there will be ecological problems and problems for the local communities. And let's face it, our record isn't really that great when it comes to hiving off our natural resources, from land to fishery rights to oil and gas. The tradition has been privatise them, open them up to multinationals, flog them off, enrich the middleman, and the local people lose out. And I think against this backdrop, and against the backdrop of the fact that there is a current proposal in the works for the harvesting licence of 20% of the seaweed from Ballyvaughan to Belmullet to a Canadian company, then I don't think the concerns are exaggerated. These are well-founded concerns, and it's very clear from the evidence elsewhere in Canada and Norway in particular that large-scale mechanical harvesting of the kind that the government is leaning towards is not a sustainable way to go. So I think we have to start by recognising the very real threat to the livelihood of traditional harvesters, some of whom attended here today and were present in the gallery coming up from Bantry Bay and other areas, and I think they have posed legitimate questions for the government to answer with regard to the lack, I suppose, of regulation, transparency and the way in which the licences have been granted. And the Bantry Bay example, sadly, is a good one in the sense that it is so bad, because we had BioAtlantis without any consultation whatsoever with the local community, being given the right to harvest 1,860 acres area over a 10-year period, including a clause to allow them to self-assess the environmental impact. I mean, you couldn't even make that up. The assessment doesn't even kick in until 3 years down the road, and then they have the right to self-assess the impact. It's absolutely and utterly ridiculous, given the importance of seaweed to our ecosystem and indeed the number of species that are reliant on it for food. And, you know, I really question the manner in which the government has gone about this, because much like the offshore exploration licences that the government handed out last year, long-term licences that tie us into commitments that we may regret are frankly irresponsible, and you're doing it again. Effectively, we're given the right to private enterprise to plunder natural resources at a profit, and that is way too risky for the Irish people, because there is a difference between harvesting and extraction. And I think the seaweed industry in many ways exemplifies that difference, because extraction involves the material removal of raw materials from the planet, and in many cases it's dirty and damaging and needs to be closely managed, whereas the traditional method of seaweed harvesting in Ireland takes place after the tide has receded. The crop is yielded manually. The harvesters make sure to leave a good proportion of the plant behind undamaged so that it can regrow and so on. It's a win-win, whereas the mechanical process not only potentially damages the seaweed, but it also depletes the stock, affects the life cycle of some types of seaweed and therefore other sea life. And it is illustrative that Marine Scotland, for example, had the good sense to conduct an environmental impact assessment on this, and they found very clearly that the artisan hand or manual harvesting was far less, obviously, environmentally damaging. There's always a small risk, of course, but it's very clear that the mechanised harvesting of kelp has significant adverse effects to their minds. So, given that seaweed and sea grasses play a huge role in marine and coastal ecosystems, and that some species actually modify their environment to support high levels of marine and coastal diversity, they are described as ecosystem engineers. That's what they are, and I think we need to monitor them carefully, particularly kelp. The last point I'll make, Ceann Comhairle, is that seaweed products, as we know, are becoming very popular, and some of those products are being promoted for their health properties and so on, and there is a rising demand for that, and that's very good. In many ways, waste, but we have to balance that with how it's harvested and what it's used for, because it's not just about healthy food, if you like. If we increase, for example, seaweed removal from our coast to use it, for example, to produce supplements to aid intensive pig farming, which in and of itself has adverse environmental costs, then we have to conclude that it's not really worth it. So we need to look at this holistically, we need to monitor carefully, protect the traditional methods that are there and protect this vitally important resource in a transparent manner for the benefit of the Irish people, not foreign multinationals.
Thank you, Deputy Daly.